Welcome to today's webinar, Walking in Public Health, Research Insights into the Value of Active Living, hosted by the Maryland Department of Planning in coordination with the Maryland Department of Transportation and our many Walktober partners. My name is Michael Bayer. I'm the Manager of Infrastructure and Development at the Maryland Department of Planning and host of the Walktober Walkinar series. Walking is an activity that many of us take for granted, but as pedestrian accident rates continue to rise and access to safe pedestrian spaces is diminished, communities are recognizing that walking and improving the walkability of our neighborhoods requires public attention and action. Throughout October, the Maryland Department of Transportation, in coordination with several state agencies and other partners, is sponsoring a series of webinars or walkinars to highlight how we can collectively rally around walking, an activity that is both central to the state's active transportation efforts and a critical component promoting public well-being. This is the third in a four-part series that we will host every Thursday morning this month. Thank you for joining us today and throughout the month. For more information about Walktober, please visit mdot.maryland.gov/Walktober or visit smartgrowth.org and click on the Walktober Walkinars link. The Maryland Department of Planning also hosts a national webinar series in association with the Smart Growth Network on smart growth and planning topics available for viewing at smartgrowth.org. We encourage you to visit the website and to subscribe to our e-newsletter to learn about our upcoming programs. We are recording this webinar and we'll be posting it online. All participants today will receive an email with a link to the recording once it is posted. You can also find out about planning initiatives, planning tools, and educational opportunities in Maryland by visiting the Maryland Department of Planning's website at planning.maryland.gov. The views expressed by the speakers in this webinar are those of the speakers and not necessarily of the Maryland Department of Planning or the state of Maryland. Viewers of this live event are eligible to receive 1.5 CM credits from the American Planning Association, as well as 1.5 CNUA CEU self-reported credits from the Congress for the New Urbanism. To log your AICP credits, visit the American Planning Association's website at planning.org, log into your account, and search for the name of today's event, which is Walking in Public Health, Research Insights into the Value of Active Living. You can also search for event number 925-8755. So today our speakers are Dr. Pedro Saint-Maurice and Dhruti Patel. Pedro Saint-Maurice, Ph.D., joined the metabolic epidemiology, sorry, I'm gonna miss that word, branch, MEB, at the National Cancer Institute and the National Institutes of Health in 2016. He evaluates the impact of physical activity on health during midlife by examining activity duration patterns, intensity, and timing. He has also examined the relationship between daily step count and stepping intensity with mortality in both healthy adults and adults with chronic conditions, including cancer. Prior to joining the National Cancer Institute, he was a postdoc at Iowa State University and a research consultant with the Cooper Institute in Dallas, where he led several studies to understand the measurement properties of both accelerometers and physical activity questionnaires. He was promoted to research fellow in September of 2021 and received his PhD from Iowa State University in 2013. Dhruti Patel is a family and consumer sciences educator at the University of Maryland Extension, serving Maryland's Eastern Shore. Her primary areas of teaching are nutrition, health, wellness, food safety, and preservation and stress. In her role as an educator, she assesses the nutrition and health needs in the community, develops educational programs, and assesses the outcomes. She looks for effective, innovative, and research-based methods to create positive behavior change in individuals and communities. Her current focus is on creating well-rounded nutrition and health-based programs that address overall well-being using mindfulness and food preservation methods. She has an MS in Nutritional Sciences from Texas Tech University and earned a postgraduate diploma in clinical nutrition, dietetics, and hospitality management from IHM Mumbai in India, and a Bachelor of Sciences in Food and Nutrition from BMN College of Home Sciences, also in India. Following their presentations, our presenters will answer as many questions as time permits. You can submit a question anytime by using the questions tool located in the control panel on the right side of your screen. Before we get started today, we'd like to share a brief video from MDOT Secretary Jim Ports introducing today's Walktober Walkinar program.
Hello, I'm Jim Ports, Secretary for the Maryland Department of Transportation. Thank you for being here today as we celebrate Maryland's 3rd annual Walktober, a month-long series of activities and educational events to promote safe walking and walkability. Following the successes of previous years, we're pleased to continue hosting a series of 4 webinars, or Walkinars as we call them, each Thursday throughout the month. These Walkinars highlight innovative practices to support walking and walkability and provide important information on safety, equity, health, and infrastructure. To learn more about Walktober and to find resources and events happening throughout the month, please visit our website. Today's Walkinar will focus on walking and public health and how research is providing insights into the value of active living. We'll hear from Dr. Pedro Saint-Maurice, postdoctoral fellow with the Metabolic Epidemiology branch of the National Cancer Institute, and Dr. Dhruti M. Patel, family and consumer sciences educator with the University of Maryland Extension. I'm excited for today's event. Thank you for joining us and enjoy the presentation.
Secretary Ports, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pedro. Welcome, Pedro.
Good morning, everybody. See if you can all see my screen.
Yes, you need to swap, and there you go. Go ahead.
There we go. Okay, well, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of Walktober and the Walkinars. And thank you to all of you that found the time to join us. It's a beautiful morning, so we're going to be talking about walking and some of the science behind walking. And had the pleasure to walk this morning, just my 20 minutes to get to work, and it was a really nice time. So in the next 25 minutes or so, I'm going to guide you through the general benefits of physical activity. I'll then get into more of the science of how many steps per day, a question that everybody wants to know, and share some of the work we've done. And I'll finalize with some ideas about how should we be thinking about resetting, step goals, and what are the implications for the overall population health if we were to think about a population that would be slightly more active through walking or any other sort of physical activity. So, physical activity has tremendous health benefits. There's what we think about more acute adaptations or immediate benefits. A lot of good research showing the impact of physical activity on cognition. That's really well studied in younger populations, but also among older adults. And then there's also the long-term benefits of physical activity. Reducing the risk for cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes, but also having a critical role in cancer prevention. And that's what we do a lot here in our division at the NCI, examining the relationship between physical activity and cancer prevention. And we've contributed to science showing that physical activity is associated with a lower risk for about 8 different cancers. And that's really exciting research going on right now in our division and still ongoing. Now we've learned about all this probably since the 50s. Probably among the first studies that looked into these double-deck buses in London that had a great idea of looking at risk for coronary heart disease between the conductors, which were the individuals going up and down those stairs you see there, collecting the tickets, and the folks that would be driving the bus, right? That would spend most of their work time sitting. And it was really interesting that they found that individuals working and going up the stairs, collecting the tickets, had about half the risk for coronary heart disease. And really the science of exercise and physical activity epidemiology really took off from there. And there was a lot of more studies looking at lumberjacks and postmen and other occupations that were considered to be active occupations. And all that science between the 50s and about 2008 or 2007 added up to what we found out to be the first federal physical activity guidelines for Americans. And that was a huge step. For the first time, we had endorsed guidelines that were telling Americans how much physical activity is good for your health. Then 10 years later, as you can imagine, a lot more science came after that. And we work on the revised guidelines for Americans. And that really tells us the state of art at this point of what we know about the ideal dose of physical activity for adults and all other ages. We know that individuals for good health should be thinking about doing 150 to 300 minutes a week of what we call moderate to vigorous intensity. And that's, you can think about that as a brisk walk as your reference. We also know that there's additional benefits beyond those amounts. And of course, we also keeping in mind that we should find time for resistant exercise or muscle strengthening activities at least twice a week. So these are really the current guidelines in place of what we know, how much physical activity we should be thinking about. Now, what was really interesting when the guidelines came out in 2018 is that when the committee had a meeting just before releasing the guidelines, they found out that there was not a lot of studies out there trying to answer the question of how many steps, right? So you can see this is an actual slide from one of the meetings of the scientific committee involved in developing the guidelines. And you can see that, for all cause or heart disease, type 2 diabetes, there was either no evidence at all available. So that means no informative studies that could tell us how many steps, or they're also very limited or very limited evidence. And of course, this is really critical, and you can imagine why. Walking is the more popular form of physical activity, not only to the Beatle fans that probably travel to London every year to cross Abbey Road and get their picture, but to Americans and people in a lot of other countries where walking is the sort of favorite activity during the day. So this is one study we've done back in 2019, about 2,500 adults, and we asked them to tell us in the last 24 hours what sort of physical activities they were doing throughout the day. And here you can see you have activities that take place at work or in school, for transportation, at home, that's house caring, or for leisure time, which is what I usually think about when we go for exercise session or to the gym, using our free time to be active. And the bubble size that you see here pretty much tells that the more often the activity was mentioned, the larger that bubble is. And I think you can tell right away by looking at this that the larger bubbles will have some sort of walking label. So it is really telling that walking seems to be, pretty popular when people decide to be active. And to show that a little bit better, I want to zoom in and focus on transportation physical activity. So among those that indicated that they were active for transport, they would do some sort of activity, 82% of those said they were doing so by walking to and from places. So you can see that's a large proportion of individuals that select walking as their favorite activity when they had to commute in an active form. But also looking at leisure, so you can also see that among all different sorts of leisure activities that you can think about, and that people report in our study, walk for exercise was again the most popular activity that was mentioned. About 39% of adults in the study reported that they would go for a walk as a form of exercise. And that's substantially larger, as you can see, when compared to other sorts of activities. So it is really convincing that, and it's well established that walking is the most popular form of physical activity in the US. And I include an additional resource from the American Time Use Survey that shows the exact same thing in the large sample of US adults. So if walking is such a popular form, we got to ask the question: so how many steps per day should we be piling up throughout the day? And that's a question that everybody wants to know, and people think they might know because we've heard about 10,000 steps. Not surprisingly, your Fitbit probably goes off every time you cross the 10,000 steps, saying you achieved your goal. But we really want to think about where this number came from, because there was, as I told you before, there was not a lot of evidence to give us the magical number. So this is a German pedometer, and interesting enough, you can see that you analog and it will taking steps and goes about to 10,000 steps if you look carefully. But I think also more interesting is the story from what happened in Japan in 1965, and this was just after the Tokyo Olympic Games. This company came up with a pedometer that was called the Mampometer, which translates pretty much to 10,000 step counter. And really from here, the 10,000 steps seemed to stick and stayed for a long time. And people still attribute the origin of 10,000 steps to to this company in Japan back in the 60s. It was really a successful campaign, probably the most successful in exercise science since the 10,000 steps has been around for so long. But they even came along with different images of how many steps you should expect from doing different things. So you can see a waitress there on your left, that's about 12,000 steps at the end of the day. You can see another person walking in their office, down the hall and so forth, and that's about 11,000 steps. And there's other examples. So really a nice effort to promote steps, but really the place where the 10,000 steps came from and sticked around for until these very last days. But things have changed, and now we measure steps, also the way how we measure steps. And the one thing that you want to know is that as in the scientific community, we're very particular about our measures of steps, and we want to know that we're measuring steps well. So this is probably my favorite study that has been done to test the extent that a step counter was actually measuring steps and how much of an error you should expect. And usually our studies, when we test these devices, they usually go like this. We invite participants to our labs, and we buckle them up with as many devices as we can, while still hoping that they can still move and go around their usual activities. But this is an example of this study. On your left, you see the participant that has devices on the ankle, hip, waist, and wrist. And then the neat thing about this is that they set up an additional GoPro camera on the chest and slightly tilt to the ground so they could videotape the feet and people walking throughout the day. So, and the participants left the lab, they spend a day consistently recording all the steps from devices, but also from the video camera. And then that data went back to the staff team, and they observed each individual video, and they manually counted every single step. And then they looked back to the devices and determined, okay, what extent do the devices are matching what we just counted from our hands? And that would be kind of your gold standard, your manually counted steps. And overall, there were good news. The step counters were about between plus or minus 20% of the steps counted by hands. But we did learn that depending on where you place your devices, you might get better or worse estimates of your step counters, as you could expect. So keep in mind that what I just told you is probably a little bit different than the way you measure your steps. So you probably have an Apple Watch or a Fitbit or a Garmin device, and that also counts steps. And this is what we call consumer-based devices, which are slightly different than the devices I just showed in the previous slide, which are research-grade devices. But there's also a lot of science, as you can imagine, that has looked to an extent that these devices, the consumer-based devices, kind of match what we're getting from the research devices that we tend to use. And they come pretty close. It's more about how you define a step that matters, and we can talk more about that at the end if people have questions about that. So back in 2003, 2006, in the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, we had that concern, and we had the idea of including one of these devices in this large study of the U.S. population. And NHANES is really a 2-year cycle study that happens in the U.S. to assess the health of the nation. And it measures several indicators that relate to health, including physical activity. And in this particular cycle or year, we also included these devices called an accelerometer that goes on the waist, and that counts steps as well. And the idea was that we should really start getting a better idea of how much physical activity U.S. adults or the U.S. population does throughout the day, and open up room for conducting studies just like the one I'm about to show you. So you can see here as a general idea for the protocol, people wear this device on the waist. They wear it throughout 7 days roughly. We usually tell them, put it when you wake up, you can remove it when you go to sleep. And then every minute gets recorded for steps and other metrics. And that's information we can use to set the relation between physical activity and several health outcomes, just like the one I'm about to show you. So we had an idea with the gap that I told you about, that we didn't know how many steps actually needed for good health. So we went after this question and examined the NHANES data set that I just told you about, and look at the relation between step counts from those devices and mortality in U.S. adults. And funny fact about this study is that it actually came out on March 24, 2020, and you probably still, all of you, have this kind of date or close enough in your minds. We were about to hit lockdown and COVID was just starting. And when this got off the press, we're getting all these questions. So you're telling us to do, this many number of steps. We've been told to stay at home. So we had to be creative and think about ways that people could still be active while in their home or apartment in New York with very little space. So there were some interesting conversations about ideas and trying to be creative to still maintain some level of activity, which was possible. So if really think about the study with it, it's really like, imagine the US adult population, and we know adults take a different amount of steps. You have people that do 2,000 steps, 4,000 steps, or 12,000 steps. And when we set up these study designs, really what we're trying to do and what we did in this particular study was sort people by the number of steps they did and put them into bins. So you have your 4,000 steps people, and you put them all in the same team. And now you want to ask the question, do adults with more steps per day, with either 8,000, 10,000, or 12,000 steps, do those individuals have a lower risk for early mortality when compared with those that did only 4,000 steps? And this is what we call an observational study, really trying to understand the relations and long-term associations with mortality. So I'm about to show you the results of the study, but first I want to be a little bit careful in explaining what you'll see. So in this plot on your horizontal line, you see there, that's your amount of steps, and you see the 4,000 steps. That's the team, your reference group, or the people you want to compare with. And then you have the risk for mortality that will come up in a little bit. And all you need to know is that if you see a data point coming up on the top half of this graph, that means those individuals have a higher risk for mortality. And if you see them coming on the lower part of the graph, that means they have a lower risk for mortality. So this is what we found. Again, a sample of about 5,000 adults. The first thing you'll notice is that those individuals that roughly did about 2,000 steps, they were at a higher risk for mortality when compared with 4,000. And this was a measure of steps, and then following up individuals over a 10-year period and knowing exactly when, if they passed away and when they died, and what was the cause of death. But then looking through the line, you see that individuals that did 8,000 steps were at lower risk, and then doing 12,000 steps even at even lower risk for mortality. So this is really interesting and really shows that there's this curvilinear association where you seem to benefit at more steps per day you accumulate, and all the way up to 12,000 steps and probably beyond that, it seems that your benefits kind of plateau after that. So then we asked the question, I mean, are these results generalizable to important segments of the population? Do men and women get the same benefits from steps? And again, this is the same plot with higher risk on the top and lower risk at the bottom. And you have your steps on your horizontal axis. And I think you'll notice that's an example of 40,000 steps. It's pretty much identical, that the two lines overlap, meaning men and women seem to have similar benefits when it comes to accumulating more steps per day. And then we also look at different age groups. That's right in the middle over there, and you see that the lines are also pretty close to each other. And then finally, we look by race, ethnicity, and again, the lines also come pretty close to each other. So it's really telling that everybody gets to enjoy the health benefits of doing more steps per day. So this was really unique. So you might wonder and ask, is this the only study that tells us about the health benefits of steps? And it is not. It is not. There was just this last year. It's pretty consistent. There were a couple more studies that got out. This is one study we were also involved that combined data from 15 different studies, roughly about 50,000 adults. And again, if you look at the curves, it's the same risk for mortality, the same idea that I just showed you on the previous slide. And you see that there's the same relation, a curvilinear association between more number of steps and risk for mortality. And here was interesting that adults that are older, about 60 or plus years of age, they seem to have benefits at the lower step threshold, which is interesting. And then just a month ago, just this last month, there was also this important study that came out that did same examination, this time adults in UK, about 80,000 adults. All of this, again, they were wearing a device, so this is a really good measure of steps. And And if you look at the curve linear association, you might wonder, oh, this all looks the same data because the curves keep showing the same way, right? But it's not. It's different studies, different people, and different scientists leading their research that keep showing the consistent benefits of more steps per day. So really exciting research supporting that walking is beneficial. So if I were to compile all this information and tell you, well, I would think 8,000 is a good number. And if once you get there, I would say 12,000 is even better. But really, I think the really key message is, taking more steps per day is beneficial for health, and that's where we should all aim for. So at this point, you're probably wondering, all right, I need to walk more or pile up more steps, and I'm going to start right away, start tomorrow. So where do I start? How does this all come along? Should I be, where should I aim for? And I came up with this slide, hoping that helps a little bit to you to understand, how many steps match a given distance, or how much time is involved if you were to think about, okay, I'm going to add an extra 1,000 steps or 2,000 steps to my usually daily routine. So imagine you're at that point where you have your baseline is about 4,000 steps a day, and you're thinking, okay, if I want to add 2,000 additional steps, what would that mean? Well, that means about a 20-minute walk and about a 1 mile distance. Okay, and you can think about adding more, 4,000, and you can see you have all the math there. But what I think is really interesting is that if you start thinking about active commuting and thinking about walking to work or being more active, taking public transportation and so forth, that's likely to add up about 2,000 to 4,000 steps at the end of your day. And that's an extra 20 to 40 minutes of physical activity. And we do know that those amounts have about a 30 to 50% lower risk for early mortality. So really showing how active commuting can make a big difference in the amount of steps you can probably pile up by being a little more active. Now, I do want to focus just a little bit on this lower amount of an extra 1,000 steps a day or additional 10 minutes. So imagine tomorrow you get the news that the U.S. population activity has just increased on average by 10 minutes, or an additional 1,000 steps. What would the implications be for the society in terms of health? We asked that question early this year, and we published this study, and really tried to project what would happen if we were successful in increasing the entire U.S. adult population activity levels by an additional 10 minutes to what they already do. And this was really fascinating. We found that adding these extra 10 minutes a day could probably likely prevent 110,000 deaths a year. So that's a really impressive amount of the impact that such a lower amounts can have on the health of the population. And then again, we asked the question: are these benefits the same across segments of the population? And we found that the results were very similar from men, women, and different race, ethnicity. So again, really supporting that physical activity is inclusive as it can be, and that everyone gets to enjoy the benefits of being more active. So these got a lot of press interest, as you can imagine, and people were really interested in finding out more about this. And we got a really nice interview with the New York Times where we kind of explained the study and the implications. And you can all read more about this if you want. Yeah, the really important message to the population as a whole. So now we have to ask the question: so how do we get there? How do we get people to get those extra 10 minutes a day, right? And one way to go about this is by looking through the National Physical Activity Plan, which has been around for a while. And really the goal of the plan is to identify the successful strategies that we can use to help the population be slightly more active. And you can see at the end of that list, transportation, urban design being an important component of this piece. Having good bike paths or roads that people can walk to work and get on public transportation is a really important strategy to increase activity levels in the population. But also, since we're here today, Walktober is another good example of what you should be thinking about. This is one great way to increase awareness of an active lifestyle, and hoping that people think about being more active and the implications of being more active. And so is Walk Maryland, another great event that aims to promote a more active lifestyle. So it's really exciting where we got with exercise science and physical activity epidemiology, showing that how much we can all benefit by being more active. And with that, I really appreciate all of you spending your time to attend today, and I'm looking forward for a discussion that will come at the very end of this talk. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Patel. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. And Dr. Dr. Morris, I truly appreciate all the scientific evidence you provided, as well as the recommendations and some strategies that we can start applying to get the benefit from walking. I am going to transition more now towards more of a behavioral science, psychology, and social science aspect of walking, and actually eating too. And that part actually comes from the mindfulness approach. I'm not sure if you've heard of this approach, but since past couple of decades, we have been seeing more and more research that is actually being done in this area in association with neuroscience, medical field, pain management, addiction recovery, leadership, as well as education. So many of the branches within our communities are actually looking into how we can actually get the benefit of the mindfulness. So here we are now going to talk about what we can do to create more intentional awareness using mindfulness on becoming more aware of our lifestyle in terms of walking, eating, connecting with people, etc. I do want to give a little bit of information on my journey with it, because in my training is actually from a clinical sciences within nutrition field. I started being a clinical dietitian, working with patients, and then transitioned to clinical studies within that field, and now moved to the community nutrition. So I have about 17 years of experience in the field. And what I'm realizing is that being siloed isn't a great approach when it comes to changing any habit, whether it's you moving more or whether you're trying to eat healthier and get more healthier, right? It needs to be a good amalgamation of your physical well-being as well as mental well-being. And mindfulness gives you that intersectionality that you need to be able to merge these two and try to address these habit formations or habit change that you wish to do. So let's get started first. So these are some of the reflection topics I'll be discussing. First being, what is intentional awareness and how does that relate to what we are trying to achieve during Walktober month when it comes to walking more, or start walking more, and infuse a healthier lifestyle overall. I'm also going to add a little bit about why mindfulness is a good approach when it comes to changing these specific elements of your lifestyle. Also using it as a tool, which is very, very profoundly helpful, and I can attest to that through the research I have done, as well as the anecdotal experiences I've had with my clientele in all different parts of the communities in Maryland. And also ways you can infuse mindfulness within your walking and eating and any kind of lifestyle change you're trying to aspire to have. So let's start with intentional awareness. So there are two parts of this term, right? We have intentional and then we have awareness. Let's start with awareness first. Awareness is something that is a presence of mind, or general presence of mind, or a focus, when it comes to awareness. Those are two main aspects of awareness. And then intentional is purposeful. So you are purposefully creating this awareness and focus in whatever you're doing. Maybe you are listening to this, session. So that can be one way you are practicing awareness, intentional awareness, right? So it can be actually, it can be translated into anything that you do in everyday life. However, it is becoming more rare, currency these days because of the bombardment of information that we have through social media in general. We are constantly overwhelmed by the information, and most times our time goes in distraction and trying to do more automatic type of task, and there is rarely a time where you're truly creating that focus and that moment on whatever that you're trying to achieve. Our human tendency is such that, we are either, lingering in the past and in the past, past moments through nostalgia, rumination. It can just be even you lingering in the moment and recollecting all the wonderful memories you had. can also be a place for depression or depressive thoughts too. Or we spend a lot of time even worrying about things of the future. What's going to happen? Inflation is here. How are we going to cope with that? We just went through a very huge and devastating pandemic. So that has also had a trickle-down effect to our current time. So that can cause a lot of worry too. And it's also a very positive place of hope and creating your goals and have a vision of your life, right? But it is also a place of anxiety too. And so most of our time goes into these two parts of our life, either the past that has already happened and we lived there, or the future worries, that is, what is going to happen now, which is very uncertain. We don't know if we're going to even live the next 5 seconds, right? So it's uncertain. The only time, though, that is in our hand is present. It's the moment where we get to be more aware and have a presence of mind. It is also a place where we can actually practice reflection and response to anything that is coming our way, what I mean by that is let's say if you're experiencing a stressful event, and if you're practicing this intentional awareness of the moment, you can actually have more reflective response to it. If you're practicing awareness. So the idea is to bring yourself as many times as possible in a day in a present moment and in whichever activity you're trying to do. That can be a walk too, or having that piece of fruit that right now it's apple season. So if you're biting into an apple, just eat an apple and just experience the apple in its entirety. So the idea is to create more intentional awareness in the present moment. And how we do that is by practicing mindfulness. It can be as simple of a practice as you taking deep breaths and just focusing on how it feels like when you're breathing in and out. And so as you're listening to it, just do that with me. Just breathe in and just focus the way the air enters your nose and fills up your lungs, and breathe out through the nose again. Just, doing those couple of deep breaths can be very calming and very centering in the present moment. So I do want to start with a very simple definition of what mindfulness is. And I really love this definition because it really encapsulates the essence of this practice. It's a moment-by-moment awareness of your thoughts, your bodily sensations, and the environment that you are in. So right now, if let's say you're sitting on your couch and you're listening to this, that's an environment you are in your living space, right? And the main aspect of this is by practicing non-judgmental lens. Now that is hard. And I say that by my own experience as well as my audiences and my students' experiences too, because we tend to judge everything. And that's a good aspect of us human beings. We are constantly making decisions. And so it's very, very important to judge one aspect to another, or one option versus another, but it becomes a cyclical, endless moment and state of inertia where you just can't step off of those judgments. So it's a good idea to practice mindfulness without judging. And how we can do that is that when you are sitting down and just taking deep breaths, just notice the nature of the breath, how your body feels, how your thoughts are, but not delving into it. The one example I like to give, and I explain this, is that think about yourself sitting at the shore of the beach, right? You're sitting and observing the ocean. You're seeing the waves going, up and down, and you're observing the sky, the sand, people, maybe kids playing on the beach. You're absorbing it, but you are not in the water, right? In the water is when you start judging, critiquing, having opinions about everything, but that's not the idea. What you're doing is taking a back seat and just looking at the whole picture in its very objective manner. All right. So before I even get into what mindfulness is and how you infuse it, I think one thing I always like to talk about, because media has really blown this approach out of proportion, and it almost feels like it's a cure for everything, but it's not. So here are some things that you need to know, and I'm being very honest here about this, is that mindfulness is not a silver bullet for your problems. It's not going to solve your problems. It's not going to cure your stress. It's also not going to make you walk more. And it's not going to make you eat healthier. And why I say that is because it is not something that you do, but it's something you be. Mindfulness is a way of being. So if you are being in a present moment, it is going to only create a ripple down effect that's not going to lead to something very specific or a goal. So this is what mindfulness is. It's an opportunity to become more aware in whatever you're doing. So if you're having dinner with your loved ones, with your family, you're just having dinner with your family. If you are working on a specific project and you're completely immersed in it, without any notifications jumping on your phone or your computer, you're just immersed in that task. That's intentional awareness too. So it helps you to become more aware. It also creates this really good space for self-awareness. And as I said before, we live in a time of distraction, and it's really hard to sit down and really think about, how am I feeling right now? How am I experiencing the world right now? How my body feels right now, right? To the space, or in general, how I feel. And so that awareness is becoming very rare by the day. And so mindfulness gives you that pause of creating that awareness for yourself. And in that process, what you're also doing is you're becoming more aware of your emotions too. And the humans have a tendency to try to avoid our emotions as best as we can. Not many people are actually very avid practitioner of sitting down and just processing their emotions, right? Many of the mental well-being related efforts actually talk about the developing more mental or emotional awareness around your experiences. So mindfulness gives you that space and time where you can do that. It also gives you a space between a reaction and response. So there is a difference between reactivity and response. And I'll just give you an example. I was just in my parking lot. There was a car, and I was trying to get out to go to work. I had a class to teach, and so I was in a hurry. And I see a car right in front of me, blocking my way. So I'm stuck in the parking lot, and I was getting frustrated. I was almost ready to react. However, then I observe a young mother with her little child coming and rushing towards the car that was blocking me and apologizing to me because she had to take care of her child who just vomited. So she had to clean the child. So, again, I could have reacted, right? How many times we are always in a space of reacting rather than responding and, giving that pause to ourselves to truly get the sense of the situation. Mindfulness can give you that pause and that space that you need. The other thing that happens with the emotional awareness is also you learn a lot about yourself. You learn to be more empathetic, because you learn the little nuances that you are as a human being. We are not perfect. There is no perfection that exists within the world. We all have our own highs and lows, and we have our challenges and struggles. And so when we see ourselves very objectively, we notice that. And that also translates into more empathetic behavior towards ourselves, which also trickles down to other people that are around us, right? So the next one is stress resiliency, which is a really big one, right? Because I said just a moment ago that it doesn't cure stress. What it does is that it helps you to cultivate the resiliency towards stress that you're going to face. Because guess what? Stress is imminent. It is always going to be surrounding you, right? But by practicing mindfulness on a regular basis, what you're doing is that you are finding spaces where you can reduce the stress in a moment and then move on from it. So it actually helps you go on a little longer than you would have later. So it helps you with the resiliency. Many of the mindfulness studies have focused on addiction recovery too, and that is also to do with having the emotional awareness and processing feature that helps them to identify the cues and having those little ideas about the cravings and how they can manage those cravings when they're going through the recovery process. I have worked with these clients in the past, and I've seen the impact that mindfulness approach was able to give them. Chronic pain management is also another big one, because chronic pain, when you think about pain, there's objective sense of pain, which is coming from a rooted physiology. There's something going on that is causing that pain. But the other side of it is more subjective. It's more psychological and emotional in nature. And so when you start practicing mindfulness, it tries to address that part of it. It tries to alleviate the anxiety and worry and the emotional, disruptions that might happen during this time when you're experiencing pain. So that is what it helps with. So again, many of the earlier studies actually looked at this approach in relation to chronic pain too. So I do want to highlight that the techniques I'm going to talk about in just next slide any of the techniques falls into these two aspects, and you can start practicing it right now. And so look at the stage here. The both are stages, image of stages. One is open awareness stage, where you have a stage that is entirely lit. It is illuminated. Every single thing that is happening on the stage you will be able to see, whether they are people, objects, equipment, instruments, every single thing, you'll be able to see it on that stage. So the general awareness, like when you look at, let's say, from your window outside, and you look at the scenery outside, that's open awareness. Now, on the right image, you see focused attention example, which is where the light is only illuminating the artist who's playing the guitar. So now what you're talking about is more focused and highly attentive mode, where you are able to direct your attention towards just that one object. So again, going back to your window, you're looking at the scenery, and then a bird comes to your sight, and you're just focusing on that bird sitting on the branch of the tree. That becomes focused attention. So there are any of the mindfulness activity you do, will fall into one of these. So you can decide to be more just generally aware of your surrounding and your thoughts and feelings, and let that information come to you, or you can be more focused and be very, very attentive towards just one element of your surrounding. And it can even be a breath. It doesn't have to be just the surrounding, to be honest. So here is another example too. This is a beautiful fall, image. You see trees, you see water, a walking trail, a bridge, right? So again, if you are, let's say you're standing on a bridge, you will see the entire scenery, right? You'll absorb it through your eyes. You may feel the cool wind on your skin. You are sensing it in its entirety. However, if I ask you to just focus on one aspect, and that's that tall building all the way in the back, and if that's all you're focusing on, and you're looking at it, you're trying to assess the structure, what it looks like, what type of building that might be, that becomes your focused attention type of mindfulness practice. So you can practice both of these at different times and how you like it. So I just wanted to give you a little example of what you can do. So imagine yourself walking, right? It's a fall, it's a beautiful fall time. You see the leaves turning. It's slightly cooler, crisper day. And you're walking there. You can decide to pay attention to your environment, or you can just pay attention to the movement that you're doing. I think that can be very powerful too. Okay, so when it comes to infusion, there are several ways to do it. One of the really beautiful book title I love by Dr. John Kabat-Zinn is Wherever You Go, There You Are. So you can capture that attention and that awareness in whatever you do, whether you're walking, whether you're eating, or connecting with people, right? So for example, walking. I tend to practice this a lot when I'm working from home and I'm on in front of computer all day. Is that every 45 minutes I get up and I just take a couple of strides inside my house. And what I do is that I solely focus on my body and my body in relation to space. And so what I do is that I pay attention to how my leg lifts and goes down on the floor, how my joints move, right? How my core feels when I'm moving, because our core muscles actually helps to balance our body, right? How my hands are moving in relation to my legs, right? When you start noticing these little nuances, you can't help but actually feel appreciation that about your body. That because lots of the times we don't pay attention to these smaller things, such as getting up from the chair and walking, and it can be a highly effective way to gauge more attention towards ourselves and be more mindful just in that movement. The eating is also very fabulous because, if you love to snack in the middle of the day, you can pick up that snack, look at the packaging of the snack, or if you're having a fruit, just look at the fruit, smell the fruit, and bite into it, and close your eyes, and just try to chew on it and see what the texture feels like. What's the taste of that apple? How does that feel in your mouth, right? This process also does one very beautiful thing. It helps you to slow down when you are eating. which is very important because most times we are distracted and we just eat up and we don't take our time with the food. And many times because of that, we don't realize that we are overeating. When you're slowing down, you're able to understand the cues of your body telling you that I think I'm done, my belly's full, I don't need to eat anymore. And so it does two things. It helps you to explore the food in a very different way. And secondly, it helps you to get connected with your body and knowing where you need to stop when it comes to eating. So it helps you to prevent overeating too. And connecting with other people is very important too. Again, I say this to my audience all the time, the best thing you can give to others is your attention, considering how rare our attentions are now. And so, being present in that conversation and that those group of people can be very beneficial for you as well as them, right? Okay, so these are some of the activities that you can start implementing right away. The first one is something that I do myself, is brushing your teeth, with full care. Like, you can start practicing, you brush your teeth and just notice how it feels, how the contact of the brush to your teeth and gums feel like, right? How the froth feels like, what's the taste of the toothpaste? That takes, that takes time, and it actually helps you to make sure that you're brushing your teeth well, right? Enjoying a nice shower and feeling the warm water. Eating mindfully, we already talked about it. With the environment, this is very helpful because most times when I was stuck in traffic, I used to be frustrated. But now what I do is I take a couple of deep breaths, and then it just makes me realize that I'm stuck here. I can't do anything about it. So why worry about unnecessary thing? I'm going to be late anyway, right? So taking those deep breaths can actually help you de-stress a lot too during the stressful time. Just remember, whenever you see a performance, performers going on the stage before they do, their performance, they always take a couple of deep breaths before they go on the stage. Why do they do that? They do that because they're trying to recalibrate their mind and, try to tame the anxiety and uncertainty of that moment and nervousness at the moment. Again, we talked about walking and making one observation each day. I think this is very powerful. This was one exercise I actually told to my addiction recovery patients, is that on your drive home every time, try to find one new thing you haven't noticed. And they all started coming up with new observations. You will be surprised how many things we don't notice that is surrounding us in everyday life. Also, with interaction with others, it is very helpful, being present with people, actively listening. We are always ready to respond to the others, but, are we truly listening in the process, or are we ready to, just give a comment back? Practicing gratitude and compassion, mindfulness can truly help you. As I just gave you an example of walking inside the house and just noticing our body doing the things that it does so effortlessly without us noticing, that's beautiful. If you truly think about our body existing the way it does, all the things every second it needs to do so that we can live the life that we want to, that's beautiful. That should create the sense of gratitude in ourselves, that we are able to move, we are able to see, experience life the way we want to. And that do, rise a lot when you're doing practice of mindfulness, because you start noticing those little nuances in the process. So there is a lot more I can talk about when it comes to mindfulness, but I'm going to stop right now. If you have any questions, after this webinar, you can email me or go to this website, and I'll be happy to provide any information I can. Thank you so much. And we can start with the Q&A.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Dhruti, and thank you, Pedro. And thanks to everybody who's submitted questions already. And you can continue to submit them through the questions tab as we get into the Q&A, which we'll do for about the next half an hour or so. And while we do that, thanks both of you for turning on your cameras. A lot of thanks right now. Great information as well. I was absorbing this while I was monitoring the questions. So I'm going to start here with Timothy Mera, who asks, the data regarding walking seems to say there's a point where additional walking has only marginal benefits. Can we conclude that the time consumed by additional walking is better used for some other activity, perhaps weightlifting, running, or resistance training?
Hi, great question. Yeah, I think we've seen that there's general for walking and other sorts of physical activity that there seems to be a plateau in benefits. Um, I would say, people of course can use their time as they think would probably be best. I definitely want to say that weightlifting is one way or one good strategy or activity that you can add to your daily routine. So we also examined that, and just with a study published not too long ago that shows that weightlifting in top of any other aerobic activities also brings health benefits. So yeah, so that could be a reasonable strategy to include weightlifting if it's not included yet on your daily routines.
Great, thank you. Here's our next question. Do you have any comments or insight on the benefits of walking in groups? Anecdotally, it seems that if you walk with a partner, you will tend to walk more often, possibly longer. Has there been any study on this aspect of walking?
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of science behind the psychology and behavioral psychology of exercise, and and the social aspect is really important. So people have shown that the social aspect can predict adherence to a physical activity protocol or a physical activity program. So yeah, so it's definitely true that if you can work with partners, and of course that might depend on each individual, but in general, that seems to be an important predictor to the extent that somebody is willing to stick with an activity program on the long term.
Great, thank you. Our next question here is from Jason Hercules, who asks, to the point that Dr. Saint-Maurice made on active commuting, is there a quantification of biking benefits similar to what you displayed for walking, like the distance per benefit? It seems like biking would be a more practical measure of active commuting, since commuters are actually able to traverse a reasonable distance in a given amount of time versus biking, via biking, I mean.
Yeah, so I would say that it definitely varies by country to the extent that biking is the favorite activity for commuting. In the US, it's pretty clear that walking is definitely the most popular activity when it comes to commuting to and from places. But biking is also, it's also important something to look at. And there's also, a reasonable amount of research showing the benefits of cycling. There was like 4 years ago, there was this large study about pulling data for about 1 million people, and they found that biking, small amounts of biking to and from places could add an additional 10% of lower risk for mortality as well. So there is some research out there for sure showing that biking has also benefits. And if you go, and more so in Nordic countries, that's been something that has been even examined further, because as you know, it's a very popular place in Denmark where pretty much everyone owns a bike. That's definitely well studied as well. So yeah, so biking is definitely also important, even though I just focus on walking for the purpose of my talk.
Okay, thank you. Next question is for Dhruti, I think, from Christina Miller, was asking, where was the beautiful canal walk that you showed?
It's actually in a city called Frederick, Maryland. We have a very beautiful walking trail that they have created within the community. So yeah, it's a very beautiful place to walk. Thank you for asking that.
Excellent. Yeah, our folks in Maryland, I'm sure, are familiar with it. Next question here is from Sarita Men, who's asking, has there been any research on the psychology behind feeling safe while walking along a roadway?
So there has been actually many research done, especially with women population, because that tends to be very big. One of the very big populations that tends to have such experiences. And based on my limited knowledge on the area, it has been actually shown that the safety is actually one of the big barrier for them to walk. And that brings up, the question about the safer community development in the rural, especially in the rural population, where the walkability itself is very challenging. And I have worked in the rural counties in Maryland near Eastern Shore, and I know the walkability issues that exist in those parts. So that's definitely a big question that needs to be looked at on more systematic and oriented approach rather than just the entity approach.
Great, thank you. Next question here is from Shirley or Kian Lee, who's asking, do either of you have any experience working with city planners to quantify the health benefits related to infrastructure such as trails and sidewalks in a neighborhood or city?
Can go first. I do not, but there is a large body of research that has looked at changing environment and how does that impact activity levels, by building like bike paths or coming up with roads that people feel safe that they can commute without being hit by a car, all those things. So there's definitely really interesting science that has been done, showing how the extent that we can change the environment can help promote activity levels, especially when it comes to commuting.
Right. I would like to add to Dr. Morris's point, because I was part of a community coalition effort which looked at one of the Wycomico County Coalition, where a group of us actually walked through certain areas within the county, giving them the feedback on the walkability index, following the walkability index and giving our feedback on how walkable a specific area is, what are some of the improvements that can actually encourage people to walk on these areas, etc. So actually, as a result of a couple of those initiatives, we have seen a lot more sophisticated pedestrian path development as well as biking lane development too in the area. So I think there is a lot of research done in the area, and you also find many practical examples of how county governments or city governments are addressing those.
Great, thank you. Our next question here is from Scott Small, who asks, thank you for your presentation, Dr. Saint-Maurice. I was curious if my Fitbit under or overestimates my steps by 20% each day, what effect does that have on us understanding the benefit of walking and my target number of steps that I should be aiming for?
Hi, Scott. I know Scott well. Glad you're here. Yeah, so I want to say first that there's variation between how we defining steps, and Scott knows this well. With Fitbit and some of his devices, usually they're going after more purposeful steps. So they want to make sure the person is actually walking, for a given extent, even being that 10 steps or however we want to define it. So it is possible that you're getting lower steps with a Fitbit when compared, for example, with the device I've just showed you, where it's capturing every single step, side steps, any step that you can pile up throughout the day. So the first piece of that is that the associations should remain the same. So we're still ranking individuals the same way, meaning people that are more active or pile more steps, I would expect them to see, the same benefits for all-cause mortality. But then the challenge comes, what is the absolute number? And there might be variation there. And that was actually one of the reasons why in some of our studies, and that study in particular I showed you, that we stick with kind of categories of steps or an interval of steps, 8,000 to 10,000 or 12,000 to 14,000. And the reason for that is acknowledging that there's probably a 20% variation in the amount of steps that people might be looking at depending on what device they have. So really good point, and I think we have sort of an answer for that for now, and we can still do better.
Great, thank you. Our next question is from Linda Rideout, who asks either of you, is there any recorded evidence that a shorter workday or work week in the US would result in an increase in physical activity?
That's an interesting question. I do not know about that. Yeah, I'm not sure. It would be interesting to examine that and see to what extent that that might impact activity levels, because we do know that activity levels between week and weekend days, they are very different, right? We do know that. So it would be interesting to see if what that extra day would add up, or how would that change things. But I do not have the answer for that.
Right. I would say the same thing. I don't know the exact answer to that, but I know that other countries who have applied that fundamental have seen a quality life improvement in general. I'm not sure about when it comes to walking or physical activity, what are some of the implications of that? Maybe that will be something interesting to explore more.
Can I add one thing more to that that just crossed my mind as well? I think one way to think about it is how the time use will change, how we use your time will change between, the structured days where you have to go to work and days where we don't. And the days are very different. So when we go to work, there'll be commuting, right? We've talked about commuting a lot here, but I think that's really important. So when you go to work, there's commuting involved, and if you're an active commuter, that can be a reasonable component of how much active you are during the day. If you're doing that for less days in a week, so that commuting goes away and you're relocating that time for something else, and can likely go to maybe more leisure time available that you have at the end of the day, and will depend how we'll use that time, right? Free time. You can go for a walk, or you can go to the gym or do something else. So it would be interesting to see how people reallocate their time between the structured versus unstructured days and so forth.
Great, thank you. Next question here is for Dhruti from Tonya Sanders, who asks, are there any positive impacts of mindfulness on pregnancy and the fetus?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. Unfortunately, I don't know a specific research that is done with that population. I can still say from a general perspective, it tends to help a lot with emotional and psychosocial well-being. It helps to reduce stress. So many times, during pregnancy, there are a lot of emotional turmoil that women experiences and stressors too, with the physiological change and even social changes that may have to happen as part of this newer transition with the birth of a child. So I highly encourage people to, in general, if they're able to practice mindfulness. So it may have a general benefit. I am not sure though its resulting effect on the fetus and the mother's health directly.
Great, thank you. Next question here is from Jeffrey Keyworth, who asks, can you talk about the relationship of the research to helping promote programs like Drive to 5 or similar programs?
Is that, I'm not familiar with the program, so I don't know if that question was for me or not, but
I'm guessing so, but if you're not familiar,
okay,
maybe we'll just move on.
Yeah, I'll say the same thing. I'm not too familiar with that program. If you can elaborate that more, maybe we can get some feedback.
Okay. All right, we'll move to the next question, and that is, are there examples of trails or pedestrian paths that include signs and message boards that help to promote mindfulness?
So I have seen, actually, to be honest with you, I have seen storyboard, walking trails where, each of the posts on the walk actually says a story of the book. So I think infusing mindfulness, that will be really a great way to actually encourage people to be more present. I haven't heard of a specific initiative, but you're now giving me ideas. So I will definitely would love to apply that and talk to our Parks and Rec department to see what we can do about it, because it can definitely be very beneficial. Thank you for sharing that and asking the question.
Excellent. And we'll be sharing all of these comments and questions with the speakers, including the ones we may not get to, and some who are more directly comments or questions that will you can answer offline. But our next question here is from Pete Fritz, who asks, can you please discuss how walking intensity influences the health results of walking, and what intensity of steps per minute should we target for the best results?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So I didn't share on my slides, but we did look at stepping intensity in that study, and there's been a couple other studies that have done the same. And interesting enough, when we look at stepping intensity, and we kind of expect it to have an impact on risk for mortality, but then after we adjusted for total steps, it did seem that total steps were the most important piece of that equation. So meaning total steps pretty much became more important than the stepping intensity, meaning it seems to be more about the total number of steps you end up at the end of the day, more so than the intensity of stepping. So that was really interesting, and a couple other studies have shown the same, and so far that seems to be the case.
Great, thank you. We did get another clarification on what Drive to 5 is. And I guess the question he asked earlier, Jeffrey Keyworth, was, can you talk about the relationship of the research to helping promote programs like Drive to 5, and Drive to 5 being as parking a 5-minute walk from your destination as a strategy to build more physical activity into your day. These are seen in planning programs as trips to school as well as work.
Yeah, I don't know if I can directly address the impact of those programs in particular, but I can mention about something that we, for about 40 years or so, we thought that any activity that was less than 10 minutes, any bout that was less than 10 minutes, did not count to meeting the guidelines for physical activity. And that was in place for about 40 years, and that was a big deal because activities like the one just described in that question, like parking your car away or taking the stairs, those small bouts of physical activity, were deemed as not as relevant or not important for health benefits. But with the new guidelines, 2018 physical activity guidelines, that went away. So they changed the guidelines, and for the first time, they acknowledge, any minute counts. Any physical activity of short duration is also important to meet the guidelines, and that means, including those times where you parking your car away and get your 5 extra minutes to work. Actually, that's something I tend to do a lot. I try to put my car far away so I can add in some steps in those days where it can be as active as I would like to. So that's all I have about that question. Hopefully that helps a little bit.
Great, thank you. If Kenneth, if you want to respond to that in the comments or questions, I can pass along that as well. But our next question here is from Kenneth Buckeye, who's asking or saying, it's hard to consistently get in 10,000 steps every day. If you get in 5,000 steps one day, can you benefit from making up those steps on other days?
Excellent question. That's really important question. Yeah, from what we know today, we do know that it's more about the volume. So how much of total steps or total activity you get at the end of the week. So meaning if you're less active on one day and you're more active on the other day, at the end of the week, if you're piling up all those steps, that's really the really important message or the most important strategy. So definitely being least active on one day does not mean you can't try to be more active the next day.
Okay. Our next question here is from Jacob Tarp, who asks or says, thank you for a great talk, Pedro. What are the next burning research questions on the health benefits of walking?
Hi, Jacob. Good night, Jacob. Well, thank you for the question, Jacob. Yeah, I think that there's still a burning question about intensity of walking. I think that the studies we've shown that stepping intensity doesn't seem to be as important as total steps. In my mind, we still have some space to improve our measure of stepping intensity. So that's something we should do. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is really get a little bit better at the intentionally walking or purposeful walking. And the most recent study got to that a little bit, and I think there's still room to try to quantify, those longer walking bouts and seeing to what extent that improves health. So I'll say those two things: stepping intensity and those intentional steps. Know a little bit better about that, so we can understand the health benefits of walking.
Thank you. Here's another question from Lanny Eggerston Goff, who asks, based on what you were saying earlier in your presentation, Pedro, how do we measure the mortality risk?
Yeah, good question. And I try to avoid all the details because just to make sure I would finish on time. But so in one particular study, the study I've showed you, we're what we call baseline. We're assessing people at one time point about how many steps they have. But with that, we're also assessing their diet, if they smoke, if they don't smoke, alcohol habits, if they have several chronic conditions and so forth. And all that happens at what we call baseline, that one timing point. And then what happens after that? People get followed for about, in that study, were followed for about 10 years long. And during those 10 years, there are national registries in the US that will have information about if people are still alive or they passed away, and if they passed away, what was the cause of the death. And that's really unique information that we have to start linking that information with that information at baseline. So then really what happens is, within the people that have different amount of steps, like the beans I was telling you about, we want to know, who is more likely to die within those 10-year window. And once we know that, we start doing all these ratios between the reference group that I told you about, the 4,000 steps, in relation with people that do 8,000, and then in relation to people that do 10,000. And that's how we get to really that metric that I'll talk to you about, the relative risk, to understand if there's a higher or a lower risk when compared to that reference group that we selected. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Yes, thank you. Actually, a couple of other questions along that same line and in regards to this research. And the next one is from Mary Daniels, who's asking, did the studies look at mortality overall or from specific causes?
Yeah, we look at, in that didn't share, so we look at mortality overall, but then we look at mortality from cardiovascular disease and mortality from cancer. So we look at those three outcomes. And the other studies, one of them did the same, examined what we call cause-specific mortality. And what was really interesting was to see that the benefits hold. So cardiovascular disease mortality, the curve that I showed you was exactly the same, so same benefits. And then for cancer, was similar, but it did seem to be like a more linear relationship. So we did not see a plateau like we saw with the 12,000 steps, meaning maybe more activity accumulated can bring additional benefits when it comes to cancer prevention.
Great, thank you. Next one here is from Dan Hoyt, who asks, is there a correlation with walking and other healthy behaviors in terms of like diet or stress and so on?
Yeah, absolutely. So we know there's a cluster health effect where people that are more active, they tend to eat healthier, they tend to smoke less, they eat less alcohol, they have less chronic conditions. So that's usually one key factor we really need to think about when setting up these studies. So when I was telling you about the information at baseline that we collect, our statistical models, when we use to determine these associations, we really have to account to this cluster effect and account for the fact that people that walk less, inherently will have, more chronic conditions and other lifestyle habits that may impact the mortality risk. So we really try to adjust for these things to make sure that when we see an association or an effect between the physical activity and mortality outcome, that the effect is really due to the physical activity levels and nothing else, right? So really good question. That's really important.
Great, thank you. Our next one is from Suzanne Jackson, who asks, in the step and mortality study, less healthy or older people would take fewer steps per day. How do you determine whether people who are already less healthy or older and therefore walk less die sooner due to their existing health conditions or due to walking less?
Yeah, so it comes down to what I was just telling you about. So we did two things. So the first thing was what I just described in the previous question is we adjust our estimates of the association we're seeing between steps and mortality to a variety of chronic conditions. And then the second thing we did that I didn't talk about is we look at examinations between steps and mortality across different strata of the sample we have. And that includes looking at the association between people with chronic conditions. So we examine, for example, people that are reporting having type 2 diabetes. We examine the association between steps and mortality separately among that population. We examined the association between people that were between smokers and non-smokers and tried to restrict that to a group of smokers as well. People that have heart disease, people that are reporting having cancer. So we examined about 7 different chronic conditions, including other lifestyles as well. And we consistently found that within each one of those groups, even if you have a certain chronic condition, more steps again were associated with lower risk for mortality. And there's been other evidence that have kind of shown the same that people with chronic conditions can benefit from more physical activity. And in a way, really isolating the impact of physical activity on the outcome while accounting for these confounding effects. That's really what we're talking about, confounding by health status.
Great, thank you. Next question here is from William D, who asks, have you seen a statistical correlation between walking activity and gasoline prices?
Oh, I have not. We'll probably find out about that soon, though. but I have not, I confess.
It's definitely a issue that people are thinking about.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Okay, we'll have a few more questions. If anybody has any other questions, you can include them in the questions tab before we finish up here. But next question is from Shannon Halley, who asks, is there a way to correlate biking distance to steps?
Steps, can you expand a little better?
I guess
like steps measuring during other portions of the day, steps you actually accumulate while you're biking, or what?
Yeah, I think it looks like the general question is regarding like folks who bicycle. Is there a way to correlate those distances to the step data that you were sharing earlier?
Not well. Hopefully, I understood the question right. So, not in this particular study. No, we don't have individual information about bicycling during commuting, so that or you know for any other matter during the day, and how that would relate with steps. But it's possible there are data sources that would include that information. Yeah, that's all I can say about that.
Okay, thank you. Next question here is, I know that some health insurance programs provide incentives if the insured person does a certain amount of walking, but are you aware if therapists prescribe walking as part of improving their health and emotional well-being?
So, I don't know. Yeah.
Based on my experience, there are general recommendations that is given by the therapist to actually infuse some sort of physical activity. Many times it ends up being the walking recommendation, because there are a very good number of studies that talk about the positive impact on emotional well-being through walking and general physical activity. So you may see that as one of the prescribing tools or strategies that therapists might actually recommend to you to help with emotional well-being in general. But I am not sure directly with the evidence that they're talking about, though.
Great, thank you. Next question here is from Mirsha Clemens, who's asking, what activities have you seen being done to encourage walking in an office setting?
Yeah, there's a lot of good research out of Mayo Clinic where they really have examined very careful about the impact of more active environment in the office and how much that can impact activity levels. And this goes about changing the whole environment, you know, having like space where instead of meeting, you're sitting and meeting with someone, you go for a walk and you're walking around the office, and you need space, right? But walking around the office and you're meeting while you're piling up some steps. There's things people have done with standing desks. That's really common, that you have a standing desk, and hopefully you move a little bit more, shuffle around a little bit. And there's also, you know, treadmill desks, and we have some of those here as well, where you know, you can go and you do a little bit of work and you walk on a treadmill and you have your laptop just sitting next to you, in front of you, and you can still, you know, do some work while you're accumulating steps. So there's a lot of things that have been done that are available out there that people's efforts to make the office a little bit more active environment.
Yeah, I would just add to Dr. Morris's points there, is that there are also some of the ways there's been effort at infusing more walking is through lunch activities, where a group of colleagues actually go out and walk during lunchtime. Also, they have infused the idea of Pomodoro technique with walking and some form of physical activity. I'm not sure if you're aware of the Pomodoro technique. Is that a very specific time allotted to complete immersion in whatever task that you have at hand, and then a little bit of break in the middle, and then you go back to the immersion time too. This is shown to improve the productivity in general. And so for that break, many times they encourage people to walk or be physically active during that time of break. So those were just a few techniques that I wanted to share here.
Great, thank you. I think we'll have one more question here before we wrap, given where we are with time. It's almost noon. And that is, and I think you may have covered this earlier, Pedro, but I'll ask this one if you want to add. Are there any health studies that consider the walking environment? And do you have any insights or comments regarding the safety and pleasantness of the walking environment to promote more walking?
Yeah, I confess that's not of the science I usually do, but there's a CDC includes a lot of resources about the walkability index, where it has shown all across is what we call ecological studies, where they look to the extent that a city is more walk friendly in terms of safety, pedestrian routes, and different things, and to the extent that contributes to a more active population in that specific town or city. And of course that comes with a couple limitations we can talk about, but there's things out there that people have done to get at that. And I would advise, and I include that in my slides I'll be uploaded hopefully. There's some good resources in the CDC webpage that you can look through and know more about the walkability index and the impact of these things on activity levels.
Great, thank you. Actually, we did get a couple questions here in at the end that I'll ask you, Dhruti. This one from Valerie Aston, who's saying, how do you tie in both mindfulness and work environment multitasking activities? Is there a way to connect them, working at a desk and a treadmill, et cetera, with your need to be aware of your environment?
I have had a long journey with myself in terms of infusing mindfulness when I'm working too, and it's a harder battle. It's a transition that you have to make it very intentionally. So one thing, as I gave an example, that when I have a long day when I'm going to be at the desk, I make sure I have alarm set up where I'm actually just walking either outside or inside whenever I have time, and practice infuse mindful walking right there and just walk around. Now, is it going to be as comparable as having it as a physical activity? No, but that still brings the attentional awareness in your day and can help you with the stress relief too in the process. There are also many agencies who actually create spaces for the mindfulness activities too. Like I know Google does that a lot too, and there are other big agencies. IBM is also one of them who tries to infuse mindfulness in that. In terms of multitasking, the first thing I need to say, is that multitasking is a myth, mostly because what our brain is good at is task switching, and it happens so rapidly that we feel like it is happening all at once, but it's actually not. So multitasking doesn't happen always. What I suggest is that if you are trying to use treadmill and trying to work at the same time, be specific about the task that is not going to be too immersive in a way where you can actually switch between the walking and what you're trying to do at the same time. For example, if you're trying to read or trying to study material, I mean, that may be a good time. But if you're trying to do a focused task, which requires creativity and infusion, that maybe that's not the best time to actually walk, because your body is still, trying to cope up with the walking, and you're trying to, ask yourself to do this immersive activity. So that can become too much. So be careful about what task you pick when you're using the treadmill, when you're walking in workplace. I hope I answered your question.
I think so. And thank you for sharing that. And thank you for answering all the questions today. And thanks to everybody again for submitting them. I know I'm going to be watching this recording later to absorb all of the good information that you both provided today. But we do need to wrap up. And I did want to close with some closing thoughts from each of you. And let's start with you, Dhruti.
Okay, well, the one thing I highly encourage all of you to try to bring in as much intentionality in your life as possible, life happens, and sometimes we are in emergency mode, but don't let that be the automatic mode that you're always on. So try to get involved through the walking or eating. Try to bring yourself back to your body, your thoughts, your movement, the environment that you are in, to encourage yourself to truly experience the world in the present moment rather than being in the past or in the future.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Pedro, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll probably say two things. The first thing is to, and both relate to the same thing, is take advantage of what science teaches about what we know about walking and steps per day and the health benefits. And the first thing for that is we've learned recently that steps, throughout the day, even short amount of steps, either by parking your car, taking the stairs, or just piling up to small amounts throughout the day, those are really important and can add up to the recommended amounts so you can enjoy the health benefits of being more active. So that's the first thing, and that's something we didn't know in the past. We always thought about exercise as a structure and time we need to set really aside to get our gear up and go outside and do our minutes of exercise. And now we know that we can take advantage of every single time that we have available in the day by using these small strategies. And the second piece is, also take advantage of the self-monitoring tools that are now available to us, being the smartwatches, your phone, anything else, to really help you in a way to get a sense of, the days where you are least active to more active, and help you kind of set your own goals to be more active at the end of the week. So that's also one piece that we've learned from science, that self-monitoring and the accuracy of these devices is good enough to help us be more active at the end of the day. So.
Great. Thank you very much, Pedro and Dhruti, for being with us today. It's great information for our audience. And with that, we're going to conclude our webinar, Walking in Public Health, Research Insights into the Value of Active Living. I'd like to offer a great big thank you to Pedro Saint-Maurice and Dhruti Patel for a great presentation, to everyone who attended today, to Francine Waters of MDOT, who organized these panels for all of Walktober, and I apologize for not mentioning her on the last two of these, and to my colleague John Coleman, our communications guru, and a great friend and colleague who makes this all look easy every time we do a webinar. The complete recording of today's webinar will be posted on smartgrowth.org early next week, or actually later today. Also, for those who have requested one, all attendees will receive an email that will contain a link to a personalized certificate of participation. Please look for this follow-up email if you need this certificate to claim other continuing education credits. When you exit from today's webinar, you'll be asked to participate in a short evaluation. Please take a few moments to provide feedback so that we can continue to improve the webinar experience for you. And finally, keep an eye on smartgrowth.org and your email inbox for details on other future webinars, including our final Walktober Walkinar, Expanding Access to Pedestrian Infrastructure and Improving Public Safety, Tools and Case Studies, which will be next Thursday, October 27th. And with that, I wish everyone a great day.